Carl from StorageCraft. In this little video we're going to talk about the cool little Intel NUC devices. They're a great option for the true SMB with 1 to 2 servers to have a little bit of a backup and disaster recovery type server. So I mean, they're really great. They're the tiny little computers that can go, in a different part of your building or your office to where maybe your servers are, to give you a bit of separation in terms of some sort of outage that could happen. And really what you're looking for is some sort of Intel NUC, probably an i5 or an i7 that supports virtualization is obviously going to be key. But I've got here 2 8GB RAM modules, so that's giving me 16 gig of memory, which is really cool. But what you're looking for is something that has the onboard flash storage as well as a SATA port. So we want the ability to add in an additional 2.5 inch disc. So you've got to look at the models to have something where we can add in a 2.5 inch, it might be a spinning disc. So this one here is a 2 terabyte, 2.5 inch spinning disk, or maybe it's just another SSD. But what we want is the capacity to hold all the backups, as well as some extra space for the virtual boot recovery of the, for the automated testing of our disaster recovery. And should we need to fail over, we've got a reasonably spec device here that'll do the job for a small site. So let's jump in and take a look at how to set one of these up.
Alright, so I've just remote desktop onto an Intel NUC here. So just taking a quick look at the settings of this machine. It's just got 16 gigabytes of RAM. This little device is just an i5 as well. I have not joined it to a domain. I want to keep this off the domain so it's nice and secure and separate to my sort of local Active Directory network. The one thing, as I mentioned, I have done is I've enabled remote desktop. So that's the one thing I've changed. Other than that, I'll be going through the whole setup in this demonstration. So the next thing we want to do is go into disk management, and I'll just show you what I have configured here. I've got disk 1, that is an onboard flash. This particular one's 500 gigs. So I've installed Windows 10 into 100 gigabyte partition there, and what I want to do is format the rest of this as a separate volume. And the primary function of this is going to be the Hyper-V default machine folder on this volume. So we want to have them in separate disks because it's going to, the virtual boot and the advanced verification is going to be writing to this particular volume. And then I've also got, in this case, just a 1 terabyte disk here for my backup images. So this, what we're looking at is a 2.5 inch disk. I've actually put an SSD in here, but it could be spinning disk. You want to look at, if you go spinning disk, make sure it's the 7200 RPM speed. So we've got some reasonable performance there, and you may need to consider 2 terabytes or larger depending on what you're backing up. So go in here, call this E drive, and I'll just call this backup images. Cool, so they're the 3 volumes. Again, we're going to have the backup images here, and the virtual boot's going to be reading from that disk, and then it's going to be writing to the data volume, the D drive. So that separating out that read-write is what gives us the best performance with virtual boot. That's why it's important here that I've configured 2 separate disks, or if I had RAID, it would be a separate array or separate spindle of disks, not on the same one drive. So just while I'm in the system information here, I'm going to go back into advanced settings under performance, and I want to set the page file. So what I'd like to do is turn off automatically managed. I don't like to have a page file on the system drive, but what I'd like to do is on the D drive here is have a fixed size page file. So generally 1.5 times the memory. So I've got 16 gig here, so I'll make this 2, 4, 5, 7, 6. And then we'll make that the same for the maximum size. So that way it's going to be a fixed sized page file. So we'll accept this. It's going to need a reboot, so I'll actually just hold off and we'll do that shortly. So the next step I need to do, we'll just verify these volumes have been created here. We'll go into Microsoft Edge browser here and go to storagecraft.com, and we're going to go in and download the various pieces of software that we're going to use. So hover over support and then click on software downloads and updates. And in here, the first thing is downloading SPX. So ensuring that you've got Windows 10 64-bit version installed is important, and obviously having enabled virtualization in the BIOS is going to be critical as well. So I'm downloading the SPX agent. I don't need any licensing. I don't need to activate this. This is simply to perform virtual boot recovery operations. Now, just scrolling down further, the next download I want is the VirtualBoot Hyper-V plugin. So download the MSI installer for VirtualBoot Hyper-V. And then scrolling down some more, we're going right down a bit further to ImageManager. And we'll download the ImageManager. So those are really the three key downloads that we'll need at a minimum. You will also note, just scrolling down further, is Shadow Control. So if you are running a Shadow Control appliance, obviously you may take this opportunity to download the endpoint agent so that this is monitored by your central management as well. So those are the downloads that we need. Just while that's downloading, the next step I'm going to do is go into Apps and Features. And what we want to do is go and enable the Hyper-V role. Programs and Features. Turn on Windows Features. And we're just going to scroll down here to Hyper-V. In fact, just while I'm in here, I'm just going to check if there's anything else that I want to enable or disable in here. SMB 1.0 sys, it's important that you have that off. We obviously don't want SMB version 1 is prone to some attacks. I don't think there's anything else that I'm too worried about. So all I've done here is enable Hyper-V. So I'm not going to restart this now. Again, there's a couple of things I need to restart here. So we'll just come back to that in a second. Actually, just while I remember, one other download I want to grab is if we go into support the diagnostic platform tool, DTX. This is actually going to be helpful to do some memory tuning for us. So I'm just going to download the zip file for 64-bit Windows, just while we have the browser open, and save that as well. So now just opening up into the folder, here's the various bits and pieces of software. So I'm going to install ShadowProtect. Just the default settings here is going to be absolutely fine. I guess I could exclude the backup agent, knowing that on this machine I won't be doing backups. However, I've just chose to do a standard install, so that is no problem at all. Once SPX is installed, again, I'm just going to hold off on that reboot so I can go ahead and install ImageManager. And again, just default settings here is going to be absolutely fine. Now, while that's installing, the next thing I'm going to need to do is add in a user for the backups. So if I just right click and go manage on this PC, what I'm going to want to do under users is create a new user. And I'm just going to call this SPX and then give it a password. So this is going to be the user. It doesn't need to be an administrator. It is going to be the user that ShadowProtect will be used to perform the backups to. So create an SPX user. Under the images volume, I'm going to create a folder here called Backup Store. This is going to be my share. So right click, sharing, advanced, share this folder. I want a $sign so that this isn't broadcasted on my network. And under permissions, we're going to remove everyone and add in that SPX user with full control. So that's the key thing there. We've got that share set up correctly. The other thing is under security here. What we want to do is go and actually define who has access to this. So we'll leave administrators there, and system ImageManager will leverage system, but I also want to add in the SPX user with control as well. So that's best practice is lock that share down so that no one else has access to this information. Obviously, it's really important to secure that backup store. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. I've got access there as well. So click on finish. And I think at this point, I will reboot the server. Actually, there's one more thing I'm going to do before I reboot. So I'm just going to click no. Finished in the browser there. What I'm going to do is go back to downloads and extract this DTX. So I'll just jump into the web browser here and just show you quickly support.storagecraft.com. I'm just going to show you so that you know what the server tuning information is. There's a command at the bottom of this guide that I'm pulling up that will tell us what to run with the DTX software. So it kind of guides us through. One of the first things it's talking about the page file, which we have just completed already earlier, but it's just scrolling right down. This using DTX to apply these settings is going to go and do the server tuning for us. So just opening up the command prompt. It's two things I want to do in here. The first one is actually just running a quick command line to turn off hibernation, power cfg.exe/h, just because obviously this is a desktop operating system. I don't want my hibernation to be running. And then just going and copying this path here. I can now go in and paste this DTX script. So we'll just highlight that, copy, paste. So this will apply the server tuning. It only takes a second, and as I mentioned, it is going to reboot the machine. So that machine will go and reboot here, and I will remote connect back in once that comes up. So that just took a couple of minutes to reboot, given the Hyper-V role, etc. had to be configured. So the next step here is to go in to the downloads actually, now that Hyper-V is installed, and we just want to put in the Hyper-V plugin. Cool, and that one there didn't require reboot, so that's nice and straightforward. All right, next step is what I want to do here is go into power options, and just again, we disabled hibernation, but I just want to check, that I don't have this machine going to sleep. So let's change these settings, and what we want to do is set it into a high performance plan. Okay, so we've done that. The next step is let's jump into the ImageManager software. First time you open this, you will need to make sure that you set a console password. The default password is actually just password lowercase, so you have to type in something different to that. And the very next step is we want to start managing that folder that is going to contain all of our backups. So E drive backup store, we're going to select that, and I'm going to make that a backup store. So what this means is that it will automatically manage the subfolders. So all of my machines will have a separate folder inside the backup store folder, and they will automatically be pulled into ImageManager once those backups come along. So I'm going to save that. The next step I want to do is I want to enable advanced verification. So in order to do that, I need to configure notification settings. So in here, I'm currently got this machine in New Zealand on a Vodafone internet, so I'm just going to use their SMTP. Sender, and I'll put in my email address. Cool. And we can just do a quick test there as well to make sure that that comes through. While we're in here, under agent settings, the processing time is going to run at midnight. I like to put things just off the hour, so we'll just set that to 5 minutes past. Under performance, because this machine is dedicated for image management, I'll set that to high. And for replication, what I'm going to do is set this to throttle to 80 megabits. But during working hours of perhaps 8 a.m. till 10 p.m., I'll reduce it down to 20 megabits. So that's for my replication jobs. Global retention, I'm pretty happy with the default, although I want to enable cleanup of the consolidated monthly images. So I'll set that to a 12-month retention for the monthly images. And I'll turn off move consolidated images, so that way we'll actually delete those images once they meet these retention settings. So pretty straightforward. That's really the key things to do for your set and forget solution with ImageManager. Now the next step here is to jump into Hyper-V. And what I want to do here is set up the Hyper-V settings for the default machine folder. So what we'll do is we'll create this as D drive Hyper-V virtual hard disks, and C drive, again, we'll change to D drive / Hyper-V for the virtual machines. So this is where it's going to create the VirtualBoot machine file. So I want to make sure that that's on the right volume. So I've done that under the Hyper-V settings. Jumping back to ImageManager, If I right-click on the backup store under verification, I can now enable advanced verification. So we've installed the Hyper-V VirtualBoot plugin. And you'll note here it says Microsoft Windows Server 2012 R2 with Hyper-V. This will also now support Server 2016 as well as Windows 10. They haven't updated this message as of this recording, but that is totally okay. I might just set this to daily images so that we can do some testing of that. Because I'm using an Intel NUC, it's not super powerful. 5 minutes might be a little bit short on time, although in this instance I do have SSDs, so it may be okay. The maximum is 30 minutes, but really if things are taking that long, it's obviously going to impact your DR time as well. So just bear in mind you may need to increase this time if your screenshot that you're getting sent from ImageManager is not at the login screen or where you want it to be. So acknowledging that. Now the next step is obviously to go into ShadowProtect, configure our backup jobs, and then start backing up. So I'm just going to jump over to this volume, images, backup store. I'm going to create some folders for my servers, server 1, and I'll create a server 2. Okay, so I'm going to go and set up those backup jobs. I'm not going to include that in the video. That's very straightforward for 2 servers, and then we'll continue on once those backups have started. Okay, so I've actually just copied a couple of backup images into these folders. So there's a couple of images here on server 2 and a base image on server 1. So crossing back into ImageManager, if we take a look, it's automatically detected these 2 folders for us. And we can see here it's just going through the verification process of that backup chain. So if we take a look at server 1, we can see there it has verified that one already, and it's now just working through the backup chain here for server 2. Just while that's running through verification, the other thing we can take a look at is how SPX is configured on this machine. So just opening up the ShadowProtect software here, we need to log in. So this is just using administrative credentials to Windows on this machine. And as I mentioned, you don't need to activate, so we can just click activate later and close the overlay. What I like doing here is adding in those folders as destinations. That means they're accessible and quick to go in and perform a recovery. So in backup store, I've got my server 1. And I'll go in and add in server 2. This way, if I need to go and do a restore, the destinations are saved, ready to go. Makes things very quick and easy for recovery. That will all be available under the image chain browser. You can see there's my pre-saved folders. So there's server 1. And server 2 is here. So it's showing me the appropriate or relevant backup chain that's available there. So just jumping back to ImageManager for a second, I can see there it has completed verification on both of those chains. I just did notice here the little exclamation mark just indicating the folder's been inactive for at least 7 days. It's just because I've copied older backup images, but there's nothing further to worry about there. Now what I'm going to do first is there's a couple of things I want to show you. For server 2, this particular one has a larger sort of backup chain in it. So what I'm going to do is click on Start Processing Now. So this is what it would do at midnight. So click Start. And basically what it will detect there is that there's some consolidation that needs to happen. So it's going ahead here and creating a consolidated daily. There may be some other consolidation that needs to happen here as well. What this will then kick off is the advanced verification VirtualBoot process as well. So I'm just wanting to show you that so we can see it running, what that will do, and how long that kind of takes and that kind of thing. So it's just going through that process now. Verification is completed. If we just take a look at this backup chain, just wanting to monitor here because we have configured as per the advanced verification settings here for it to ensure new consolidated images successfully boot. So you can see that daily image. Now, in fact, I can just see it's happened now. In the backup chain here, this VirtualBoot migration file has been created, and in the background here, this Hyper-V VirtualBoot machine is actually now running. So this is the advanced verification now running on this Intel NUC of this particular server. So just connecting onto the console of this, if I go into settings, first thing to note is that we only give the machine 2 gig of RAM and 1 CPU. So it doesn't have a lot of resource, which is great. It doesn't need a lot, but it may take a while to boot with that amount of resource. The other thing is we don't connect the network adapter. So this can be problematic for Active Directory machines. It may mean they take a little longer to get as far as the login screen to show you that things are working. But the idea is I've left this at the default 5 minutes. It will take a screenshot, then completely destroy this machine. So it has no disruption to my users or the network. It's not connecting the adapter, so it's not going to conflict with my production server that's running, and it's going to destroy and clean this up after it's finished. So just taking a look here again, it has created a migration file. This this allows the ability to do the virtual boot. It instructs ImageManager to not apply retention to this chain while that file's there, so that nothing further will disrupt the virtual boot from taking place. The other thing is that it is read-only from this backup chain. So there's absolutely no impact if my production server is still taking additional backups here. If we jump back to this PC, in the D drive here, this is the default Hyper-V machine folder that we configured. Under virtual hard disks, it has created this virtual boot folder. And in here, we can see these 3 files that's been created. So if we just move this slider back a little bit, we've got the virtual disk hard disk folder. So that's 132 gig. That is the combined size of the volumes. And we can see there it's a thin provision disk. And then we've got the AVHDX. So these will continue to grow for the duration of the VM. We can see here this server's booted up. It's actually, this one was configured to auto login. But we can see there, it's already at about 500 meg just to get up into Windows, and that's relatively small for the server. But you know, it was a little slow to boot. As it's booting, it's writing everything it reads into this file. So if I subsequently reboot the server, it's going to be much quicker. It's going to read from the VHDX file rather than the backup image. So this is how VirtualBoot works. This is why it's really important that we've got the virtual machine folder on one volume and the images on other completely separate disks. That read and write has the biggest performance impact on a virtual boot. Obviously, the CPU and memory capabilities are a factor as well. Obviously, this is only running an Intel i5 CPU. So this machine in Hyper-V in the next sort of few minutes will be destroyed. If I just have a look, it's 5, 6, 7, 8. It's only been running for about 3 or 4 minutes so far. So in another couple of minutes, it will automatically destroy that machine, remove and clean up all of those files once it's taken that screenshot, and then it will email it off to me. So very easy. It does them one at a time. So after it's done that, if there's any other consolidated images, they will happen one after the other. So yeah, really, really straightforward. I'll bring up that email once it comes through. Just while that's going, I guess, just to show from an SPX perspective, if I go back into the image chain browser, and this time I'll maybe look at server 1. I've only got this base image here, but we'll do the same thing. I'll click on VirtualBoot, base image, go next, Hyper-V, go next, give it a name, server, what was this one, server 101. 2 core, 2 gig of memory. So obviously, if this was a live DR, the more CPU, the more memory we can give it, the better it's going to run. Obviously, this is an Intel NUC. It's it's only got an i5 in it, so I can't remember how many core that will be. So I might only give it 1 or 2 core, but I do have 16 gig of RAM, so that's going to be in my favor here. I could maybe give this, 8 gig of RAM or something to give me the performance that I'm going to need, depending on what this machine needs to run. Click create, and it's performing the virtual boot. So this is a very similar process to what ImageManager done. The HIR, the hardware independent restore, it gives it the appropriate drivers. This server could have previously been a physical server, could have been running in VMware. We'll give it the appropriate drivers. We'll create the virtual machine in Hyper-V. So if we just take a look here now, this is the server 01 that it has just created, and it is now starting that. So very quick, very easy process to do this. And once that's finished, basically the SPX console is done. There's nothing further we need to do here. This is a 2008 server, I think, this particular VM. So yeah, it's just coming up about the disk error. I've clicked continue as normal, and we can see that process is now booting. So again, regardless of how large those backup images are, we're booting directly off the backup image. We're not waiting to do a full restore, which enables this to recover extremely quickly. So even on this Intel NUC, this server is just going through that final boot process. I'm just going to ask it to ignore the disk check there to get this machine through that boot process. But yeah, this is handled. We can see there that ImageManager machine is now completely gone. It has cleaned that up. And in the background here, we've actually got to the login screen of this particular server as well. So really easy. Again, to destroy a machine manually, I power it off, close the VM. I want to delete it out of Hyper-V. Once you finish your testing, really great for SAMPIT testing, that kind of thing as well, because it's a real copy of that server. In here, you want to make sure you delete the VirtualBoot migration file. There'll obviously be one of them for each volume, and then back in the Hyper-V default machine folder, just want to clean out the the files that have remained from that VirtualBoot. So yeah, just delete them, and that's pretty much it. So yeah, really easy. I'll just take a quick look, see if that email has come through. Here we go here. So the idea is you get the screenshot. Now this was of the server that automatically logged in. So generally you're going to see the startup screen, the login screen rather. If it's still Windows booting, again, you may need to increase that 5-minute window in ImageManager to give it a bit more time to get further along that boot process. But yeah, it's easy as that. I hope you've enjoyed this quick tutorial, and you can just see how easy it is to set up these little Intel NUCs. It could be, of course, any sort of workstation that you have available, but this is giving you a great backup and disaster recovery type server, for under $1,000. So just a quick recap on what we've covered off in this tutorial. Firstly, choosing the right NUC model. So i5 or an i7 ideally is going to be a great CPU that supports virtualization. Plenty of memory, so 8 GB plus. Obviously, we're failing over an SBS server that has 24 gig of RAM, and perhaps we've only spec'd this with 16 gig of RAM. It's going to run a little slow, but it's probably going to be enough to get the business up and running. Again, something that supports an M2 slot flash onboard storage, as well as a SATA connector. And you can see this chassis enables us to house a 2.5-inch drive, and whether that's an SSD or a spinning disk, just make sure you go for a 7200 RPM disk for the best performance there. We went through the server tuning, so do reach out to us if you'd like the best practice ransomware attacks or the BDR design guide, which is what I followed today. These are great guides on securing down the backups. So in this particular model, we started with a Windows 10 Pro, which supports Hyper-V. I installed Windows 10 into the C drive of 100 gig, and then formatted the rest as a D volume for the Hyper-V machine folder. The SATA disk was configured as E drive, which was to house my backup images. And then I went through some server tuning, so fixed size page file, the DTX registry tuning, then creating the local backup user and securing down the share. And then we went and installed the software. So we enabled the Windows Hyper-V role. We installed ShadowProtect SPX, which we didn't need to activate, so no licensing is required for recovery. We downloaded the Hyper-V plugin, and as well as ImageManager. And obviously if you're using Shadow Control, it'd be a good idea to have that agent on there. So really straightforward. Hope you found this tutorial helpful in understanding the best practice for setting up one of these great little devices as a little backup server for a small site. If you need any of this information, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, my name is Carl Thompson. I work across Australia and New Zealand predominantly, but our sales team will be happy to help you with any further information. Thanks again.